This conference will now be recorded.
So, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mrinmay. Good morning, Harish, and welcome back to a fresh new session on credit risk modeling. And we were discussing about acquisition scorecards in the last session, right? So, just let me very quickly do a recapitulation of the stuff that we were talking about, right? And from there, what we'll do is we'll take that up. So, we'll take it up from there. Now, let's think about it. So let's just recapitulate the basic frameworks that we had been working with, right? So the first thing that we started off with was by posing two basic questions that we tried as understanding the basic concepts associated with credit risk. Now, when I talk about credit risk, we had used this lending example of the bank, and we had seen that under a perfect scenario, when a bank lends out the money, if the borrower is paying back the money with the principal and the interest, then there is no challenges of so there is no such challenges associated with it of riskiness, right? No challenge of riskiness associated with it, and everyone gains out of it. So the depositors get their interest, the bank makes the profit, and the person who taken the loan also makes his profit, gets his payoff, and everything. So that entire framework is done. Now, apart along with that, as we move across, right, as we look into households, producers, and bank. So basically, in the second case, when a borrower defaults or he doesn't pay back the entire money, then what happens? So what happens over there is that when the producer defaults at the end of the year, right? So there are certain risks. So there are certain questions which are posed out. Now, the first thing that happens is the first question that comes out to us is that the borrower's credibility has not been checked when the credit was being given out to him. So, the credibility of the borrower was not assessed, and the behavior of the borrower during repayment was not monitored. The next part is the business risk management decisions. So basically, what the bank should have done is the bank should have assessed the borrower's uh, credibility before giving out the loans to him, or once he has been given the loan, his behavior should have been adequately traced out, right? So once this is done, once this part is done, what we would need to actually have is what we would want to understand is the basic the business risk management decisions, right? So when I say risk management decisions, so what it means is that the bank should try to understand, the bank should try to you know the bank should have the respective risk management strategies like their acquisition scorecards, their behavior scorecards in place, along with the collection scorecards and all. So so at the so this is one of the first and the most important questions that we try to answer, that how should these scorecards be used for the respective risk management strategies associated with the bank, right? So the next part that comes out to us is the sufficient amount of capital. So how is it that a sufficient amount, how is it that the bank should have behaved while giving out the loan? So the very fact that the bank had lent out everything that was given out by the depositors in this particular example shows us that the bank has had a very flawed lending strategy, right? So the bank had a very flawed lending strategy because the bank not only gave out the money like that, but what they have also done is they have not kept back sufficient amount of capital, which could have helped them, which could have helped cushioning them on in the instance when the borrower was unable to pay back the money to them. Right. So that was the second problem that we had looked into. So the two broad, so this example actually had set out the two broad questions that we were trying to answer as a part of this module. So one part was to assess the importance of the risk scorecards that are there, and the second was the importance of the regulatory capital management, the regulatory capital accords that we had. So how should the bank go about? So this is where the two broad areas of the model gets of the module gets bifurcated, right? So the first part, while we try to answer the first question, right, uh, we see that we are trying to talk about the acquisition scorecards and the behavior scorecard and their respective role in managing risks. So that's the first part of the module. The second part talks about the regulatory capital accords and the guidelines to maintain sufficient capital, which would help the bank to maintain that sufficient amount of capital or the stressed capital to survive extreme downturns like Basel, CCAR, DFAST, IFRS 9, and so on. So these are the two broad frameworks that we will be dealing with in this particular module. And we start off with our understanding of scorecards. We start off with the understanding of uh, our acquisition scorecards, behavior scorecards, etc., and Basel, CCAR, DFAST, and IFRS 9. Right. So first of all, we start with the scorecards. We'll see how scorecards are developed. What are the basic frameworks? What are the basic stages of developing the uh, scorecards? How do we validate them and everything? And post that, what we'll do is we'll look into how is it that these regulatory models would get developed. Right. So after this, the next part that we look into is the acquisition scorecard. So we started looking into the acquisition scorecards. Now the first question that came out over here was that why do we need to use the acquisition scorecards? So the first question was to the first part was to address the why. The why was to assess the origination risk of the bank. So when the bank is actually hiring borrowers on the books of the bank needs to ensure that the borrowers whom they are taking on their books of the borrowers whom they are taking on their books are borrowers who are less risky borrowers, right? Now, how does the bank address this question? So the way the bank addresses this question is in the following way. What the bank tries to do is the bank tries to assess the affordability and the reliability of the borrower for that particular product, right? So they want to understand that if I'm giving the credit to a particular borrower, is the borrower a good borrower or is the borrower a bad borrower, right? So then the next part that comes out over here is, so then how does this acquisition scorecard help us control the credit? So the acquisition scorecard would help us filter out those borrowers who satisfy the affordability and the reliability, and it controls the credit lent out by the bank. So basically, so I would, since I'm filtering other type of the borrowers, since I'm classifying the borrowers into less risky and more risky, and I can always divert my credit towards the least risky borrowers, because the less risky borrowers would have greater chances of paying back my credit, right? So this is precisely what the entire idea is. Now the next thing that comes up over here is that what is the type of credit that I'm talking about over here. So what is the credit? The credit is the primary credit. So the borrower comes in with an application. I decide whether to give him the loan or not, and I give him the loan. I go and give him the loan. So that's the primary credit that I am talking about over here. Now the next question that comes out is that how does this control the quality of the credit? Now by ordering the borrowers in terms of their relative riskiness, right? So we can always adjust for the quality of the credit. So that is, by ordering the borrowers in terms of their relative riskiness, we can easily take a yes/no decision on whether to take a customer on the books of the bank or not. And finally, when we are taking this kind of a decision, when we are dividing the borrower into good borrowers, bad borrowers, and we are taking them and we are ordering them in terms of the relative riskiness, and we are giving out credit to the least risky borrowers, relatively lower credit to relatively more risky borrowers, and no credit to high risk borrowers, what I'm doing is I'm actually detoxifying my portfolio out of risky borrowers, right? So that's the second part of the story that we have over there. Now, after this, so basically it helps me not only channelize the quantity of the credit, it helps me channelize the quality of the credit as well. So instead of giving 100 rupees to a bad borrower and 100 rupees to a good borrower, I can actually, if I can identify, if I can distinguish between the two, right? If I can distinguish between these two, what I can clearly say is, okay, this is the borrower who is a good borrower and this is the borrower who is a bad borrower. What I can do is I can take that 100 rupees out of that bad borrower and I can give 200 rupees to the good borrower. So I'm lending of the same amount of credit, but I'm lending a higher volume of credit to a better borrower, right? And what we did over here was we had used a dummy application scorecard over here, right? And we had tried understanding, that how does an acquisition scorecard actually work. So in this respect, what we have seen is, okay, there is a Mr. A who comes and asking for a personal loan. This Mr. A is a salaried guy and he's asking a loan worth 10 lakhs. Now the question that comes out is that should the borrower be given the loan or not? Should it be an accepted decision or a declined decision? So over here we have put out certain. So we have seen that we created a application scorecard over here, a dummy application scorecard, right, where we had listed out certain risk determinants. For each risk determinants, we had created categories, and to each category we had assigned the scores, and to each category, so we had assigned the scores, right, and based on that we had a minimum created score, and if the observed application score of this particular borrower was greater than the cutoff score, this borrower would be given the loan, right? So we had talked about something called the overrides and all these things as well in the last class. So let's just walk through this again. So now the first question, when I create this risk determinant column in the scorecard, the first question that comes out is that there are many variables, right? Many variables in the data. Now how do we identify these variables from the raw data set of the hundreds of variables? So this is the entire answer that the modeling process would help us derive. That how do we reach to these four final variables from the list of the 1,000 variables or 2,000 variables which are there, right? So that's the first thing that we would like to have. Now, having seen that first thing, what we would the next question that we would come to is that how are these categories derived and how is it that the scores are derived. So these are the first, reaching to the first the final set of four variables is a part of which is the modeling exercise. The categorization is explained using the information value and a lot of variable creation for variant creation exercises. And then what we have is we have the scores, which is a part of the scoring exercise. So what we have is we have this whole entire thing which is done over here, right? So these are the questions that we would try to answer when we go on to develop the model. Now this analysis or this description has been given over here to help us understand what would the final output be and where is it that we would be using it. So first of all, what I'm trying to do through this lecture is I'm trying to fix the conclusion, I'm trying to fix the end product that we expect to see, right, that we expect to see. Now after we have seen this product, the next part that we will talk about is we'll try to understand how is it being done, right? So the how is it being done is a very long process, right, and that's the ultimate goal. But we need to understand, so when we start with the data set, we need to understand where is it that we are trying to reach to. So therefore this scoring exercise becomes very important, right? Clear on this part? So what we would just focus on at this point of time is the key characteristics of this final scorecard that we have created. So if you look into the risk determinants in this particular case, you will see that each of these factors, right, that we have used over here either reflect the affordability of the borrower or it reflects the reliability associated with the borrower, right? So it does not have any other characteristics. So basically what you have is you have your overdraft account status, you have your savings account status, you have your fixed obligation to income ratio, the number of inquiries. Now, out of this, your savings account balance and your fixed obligation to income ratio would give us a clear idea about the affordability of the borrower. So, how affordable is the particular borrower with who is applying for the loan, and whereas the overdraft account status and the number of inquiries made by him in the past are variables which gives us an idea about the reliability associated with the borrower, right? Clear? So any kind of the risk determinants, so any kind of these risk determinants, right, at an acquisition stage will either capture an affordability metric or a reliability metric. So let's very quickly once again just walk through this. So what we can see is that let's say if I take up the fixed obligation to income ratio. So let's say there is a borrower who does not have any fixed obligation to income ratio, doesn't have any fixed obligation, is not loaned up. So his entire disposable income is freely available for usages. So for so his income is freely available for uh, is what should I say, for his model development. I mean, is available for paying the EMI that he's taking the credit for, right? Now, a borrower whose the higher the fixed obligation to income ratio is, right? The higher the fixed obligation to income ratio is, the higher is the percentage, right? So the higher is the percentage. So the higher the fixed obligation to income ratio is, higher is the what should I say? How do I put this? So higher is the fixed obligation of the borrower. So more and more fixed disposal, his disposable income is booked up on a fixed basis, and hence lower would be the extent of his free income, and hence the his affordability for this particular product would be much lower. Let's say there are two borrowers who come up to me, right? So one has a monthly income of 60,000 bucks, the other has an income of 1 lakh. Now the other borrower who has the borrower who has an income of 60,000 does not have any credit presently going on with him, even though he has a credit history. Now this particular guy that I am talking about over here is someone who is so this particular guy is someone who pays an EMI of 40,000 or the 50,000 only presently. So that means 50% of his disposable income is already booked up. And now obviously there is a given a CPI or a cost of living index, CLI or whatever we call it, or consumer price index, whatever is there. We have so basically we'll assume a fixed monthly expenditure as well, right? So that's 35,000. Now if that is the case, then I have only 15,000 rupees available to pay this EMI. So so if I can give him a loan amount up to an extent where his fixed income would be up, the free disposable income for him would be this amount, right? Up to 15,000 or even less. So the higher the fixed obligation is, lower would be the capability of the borrower to access this product. So whatever factors that you finally reach out to through your modeling exercises, right? So whatever factors you reach out through your modeling exercises is uh, uh, for an acquisition scorecard must reflect either the reliability of the borrower or the affordability of the borrower. Now, mostly the financial matrices for an acquisition at an acquisition level reflect the affordability of the borrower, and the demographic factors, they reflect the risky, the reliability factors associated with the borrower, right? Okay, so this is something that we had discussed about in the last class. However, So this is one way that we had looked into it, and what we saw was that the minimum score required for the credit being given was 107, whereas the observed score of this particular guy was, of Mr. A, was 122. Now, if this was 122 and that was 107, then what we see is that there is a difference. So I can see that the observed score is greater than the minimum cutoff score, and hence he's given the credit. Now, this is a very simple way in which an acquisition scorecard can be used to take an accept decline decision. However, the major challenges with developing an application scorecard comes in when we try to reach the final set of factors which explain the model, right? So which explain the particular model. Uh, so so when we reach to the so risk determinant, like when we reach to the so when we look into the model, when we look into the overall behavior, right? So also if we look into the following factors, uh, so the challenges come when we try to reach the final set of variables, or reach the final set of categories. So the data challenges and everything. And one major challenge associated with the acquisition scorecards is the fact that it contains an accepted population as well as it contains a rejected population. And for the rejected population, you don't have the outcome. However, if you develop your model only on the you know, the accepted population, then what you are essentially doing is you are biasing your model in favor of the accepted population. And this is where the problem comes in, which is sorted out by reject inferencing. So reject inferencing is one of the most important application, one of the most important factors which is worked on, or it's one of the important modeling structure which we need when we are developing an acquisition model, right? So this is something which we will be talking about in more details as we go forward, right? But as of now we'll move into talk about the yeah. So we'll now move into talk about the application of origination scorecards. So what are the different ways, or where different places where, or what are the different accept decision rules that are there? So what are the different characteristics associated with, or events associated with application scorecards, right? So we'll be talking about several cases, several exceptions, right? We'll talk about the basic framework of developing what of an application scorecard. So what are the different types of applications which are there? What are the different types of population bases that are created? How do we go about developing the application scorecard for ourselves? So this is all that. So these are the areas that we'll talk about. But before that, let's try to understand some of the risk management strategies that are taken care of using the application scores. So the first thing that we have over here is the application of origination scorecards to combat economic downturns. Now, before we move into this, let's quickly talk about some of the uses of application scorecards. So, one of the basic uses of application scorecards is the accept decline decision. So when a borrower comes up to the bank, so we use the application scorecard, we use the cutoff application score to decide whether the borrower should be given the loan or not. Now the next part is, so how do we do this? Or what are the different outcomes that are there? So the first one of the outcome is accept. So where I'm accepting the borrower basis his scores. So if his score is over the cutoff score, then it's known as a, so then the application is an accepted application, right? Now this application is also, or this kind of an acceptance is also known as the score accepts, where your observed score is above the cutoff score and hence you are given the loan or you are accepted. That's one. The second is, so this is a score accept. Similarly, there is a part of a score decline. Score decline is when your cutoff score is greater than your observed score or your own score, then your application is declined, right? Now, from here begins the next part. So what I have over here is, so when I talk about acceptance or rejection, it's not only about score accepts and score rejects. There are certain override situations as well. So there are certain policy declines, there are certain policy accepts as well, which do not pass through the scoring exercise, or even if they pass through the scoring exercises, there can be certain underwriters overrides, or there may be certain overrides which would bring up this characteristic. So over here, if you think about it, let's think about it this way. Let's say the cutoff score is 645, say 655. Now there is a borrower whose cutoff score comes up to 653, right? So his cutoff score is actually very close to what the cutoff score is, but it's slightly short of it. So it means, so one way we can subjectively see is that this borrower is not very different in terms of riskiness as compared to the cutoff score. So what we do is we use these as a, so we send these to the underwriters. Now the underwriters qualitatively evaluate the credibility of the borrower, and then they give out an accept or a decline decision finally, right? So there are certain score overrides. So even if the borrower has a relatively lower score, he is actually overridden and is given the loan. So that is a situation which we call the low score override situation, right? Similarly, there can be a situation where a borrower has been accepted, right? Say, I apply for a particular product of Citibank, right? I pass the score, but I'm not given the product because what the underwriters or because what the management says is that this is a product which is only applicable to relationship borrowers. Since I am not a relationship borrower, I am not given the loan, or given the credit, I am turned down the credit. So that is again a high score override. Even if I have a sufficiently high score and I qualify in terms of all acceptability and reliability, given certain policies, I am unable to contest for that product and I am declined that product, right? So that's a kind of a high score override. Even if your score is sufficiently high, you are still overridden. The decision, accept decline decision is overridden and you are not given the loan. So that is a kind of a override. Say for example, certain banks have a premier product, right, which is applicable to very exclusive class of exclusive clients for them. Now, what happens is in that case, you are just given that particular credit product. Now, once you are given that credit product, what happens is, so you are given the credit product. Now, once you are given that credit product, you know that, uh, yeah. So, let's say it's given very exclusive clients, right? Now, premier product often has a characteristic called a premier by wealth, and they have a characteristic called a premier by income, right? So now you may be a guy who does not earn anything, but your parents or your forefathers have left you huge volumes of wealth, right? Now, if they have left you huge volumes of wealth, then what are the things that you can do? Then what you can do is simply the following. You can say that, okay, you have kept this money with the bank. Now the bank knows that, okay, this guy has a huge relationship balance maintained with us. So if even if he doesn't have the score to get the loan, I know he has sufficient amount of money with me, which I can use or which he can use to pay down even if he cannot pay on his own. So his affordability is ensured. So in such a case, even if he is a low score borrower, even if he has a lower score, his score is overridden. So it's a low score override, right? And he is given the loan, right? So he is actually kind of given the loan. Now, when this has happened, when this goes on for a sufficient period of time, right? So that those cases are known as low score overrides. So even if I have a lower application score, but my family I have inherited huge volume of wealth, which have a certain cutoff value prescribed by the bank, I become their premier buy wealth borrowers. So then I get all premier facilities associated with the bank. Clear? So these are some of the cases. So I just very quickly I'll go through this. So when I'm trying to talk about the accept decline decision, the first thing is accept. If an applicant's origination score exceeds the cutoff score, then the loan application is accepted. This application is known as a score accept as well. Now, acceptance is not only score driven. Some applicants can be accepted even if they do not satisfy the cutoff criteria. This is the case of score overrides. Whereas it may also be the case that a borrower who has a sufficiently high amount of score is actually overridden and is not given the credit product. So that is again a case of another override. Right? Now after this, so when the score override happen? Score overrides generally happen in the case of specific product types. Suppose a product class is a premier buy wealth. So in a premier wealth product, a credit card is given. Say it's a credit card product, right? So credit card is given to a borrower with exquisite facilities, even if he does not satisfy the score criteria of a good borrower. In this case, the affordability and the reliability of the borrower is guaranteed by the wealth that he has with the bank, which he might have inherited from his father and is stored with the bank. Right. So in that case, he's a very priced customer and he is given all exquisite facilities so that the bank can have access to his wealth with them for lending purposes and so on. Right. Then what you have is decline. Right now, if an applicant's origination score does not exceed the cutoff score, then the loan application is rejected. This is a very specific kind of a reject, which we call the score reject. Not cleared the cutoff application score. Now, even if it satisfies all criteria mentioned in the application scorecard, a rejection may come about or because of policy issues. Such a rejection is known as a policy reject. Right? So the next part that we have over here is a typical case of a policy reject is a case where the borrower satisfies all affordable reliability matrices, but is rejected. Right? So now the question that comes out is why is he rejected? He is rejected because the product he is applied is strictly maybe a stuff product. So even if though I have the affordability, but I'm declined because I do not satisfy certain policies. So that's a policy reject. Right? So this is one of the ways. So these are certain cases of accept decline as well as score overrides which are associated with the accept decline decisions. And this is where an application scorecard becomes, it really becomes very indispensable over here. And this helps in the scorecard. And the better the scorecard is, the more easily you can kind of work with this application scorecard. The more you can actually uh, not only work with this application scorecard, but what you can also do is you can kind of so you can work with this application scorecard, as well as what you can do is you can what should I say, so you can actually work with this application scorecard, and the better the application scorecard is, the better distinction of the good and bad borrower is, and the better is the acquisition portfolio which is being done. Right? So this is precisely what it is. Now the next question. So before I move on to the next part, the extended uses of application scorecards, I would like to take up questions if there are any. Now, for application scorecards, we'll mostly be talking about, so we'll be mostly be talking about, uh, what should I say? So, we'll mostly be talking about retail products. So, in our module right now, we'll talk about, okay, yeah. So, basically, we'll be focusing on retail products during our discussion, right? And while we talk about IFRS 9, we'll bring in commercial products to some extent. Okay, so before I move on, guys, up to this point, have you understood the accept decline decisions? Okay, so Harish has a question. So, is there any math behind project inferencing? Yes, Harish, there is some basic mathematics behind project inferencing, but it's more of an intuitive nature. So, I would not say it's very complicated in nature, but yes, there are some mathematics and quantitative aspects associated with it. Okay, fine. Guys, just give me a sec. I'll just come back and we'll get started. Give me a sec. Okay, I'll just check. Hold on. Hello. Guys, am I audible now? Can you hear me? Great. Mrinma, am I audible? Great. Okay. So over here, what we have is now. Now let's move to talk about the kind of application or origination scorecards to combat economic downturns. Now, one very important part where application or origination scorecards are used. Okay, so economic downturn. So basically, when I'm talking about economic down, so basically one of the very important parts where application or origination scorecards are used is to combat economic downturns. Now, these application scorecards can be used to detoxify the portfolio during economic downturns. So first of all, what I need to do is I need to define a downturn. Right now, I need to understand that what exactly is a downturn, how does a downturn work, and so on. So, so basically, what is a downturn? Now, we all know that a downturn is a period in an economy when the economy's output falls, the unemployment rises, and the overall size of the economic activity shrinks. Right now, if this is the case, so then what is the ultimate outcome? That the overall credibility of the borrowers in the economy would go down. That is, on an average, a borrower now is relatively more riskier than the the borrower than an average borrower during a growth period in an economy, right? So the affordability of the borrower on average is lower compared to the riskiness associated with the borrower. So this is precisely why the application scorecards are used for model development. I mean, sorry, this is why origination scorecards become very handy in combating the downturn, because portfolios become relatively more riskier during the downturns, right? And an average on an average, a borrower whom I am actually acquiring on my books is relatively more risky in terms of so is relatively more risky in terms of its affordability, everything else remaining unchanged. Like, given whatever his reliability was, given that remains unchanged, uh, a downturn causes the overall affordability of the borrowers to go down, right? And hence the application matrices need to be adjusted accordingly, right? So therefore, therefore application scorecard would help us in in detoxifying the portfolio. Why? Because a very simple way to handle that downturn is, what I'll do is I'll just increase my cutoff application scores. Now, when I increase my cutoff application score, the application scorecard controls the origination risk. Right. So, how does the application scorecard control? So basically, what we need to understand is, how does the application scorecard control the origination risk? So by choosing a higher cutoff score, a better and a less risky borrower can be identified. Now, origination which are made during downturns are seen to be a better quality than acquisitions made during the growth periods, because the banks and the financial institutions are very conservative for acquisitions while making acquisitions during these downturn periods. Clear? So, say basically, if I go back to this, so let's assume that this economy, this is during a normal period that this cutoff was there, right? Now, what I'll do is, I'll just go back and look into the minimum category that I had considered. So I'll say that I'm considering this to be the minimum category. That borrowers who have overdraft account status between 0 to 20,000 INR, I'm giving them a score of 15. I'm considering that as the minimum score. That's the minimum thing that they might have. Now, what I see is that an economy undergoes a downturn. The unemployment increases, the GDP falls, and the economy has systemically become very risky. So now I know that the finances of these people who are maintaining their overdraft accounts would adversely get impacted. So what I do is I increase the cutoff from 0 20,000 to greater than 20,000. So I say that I'll only be giving loans to people who have more than $20,000 or more than 20,000 rupees in their overdraft account, right? So the cutoff automatically goes off to from 15 to 22. It automatically goes up from 107. It goes off to 114. Now, what I see is the borrowers who have savings balances are keeping that unchanged. I say that borrowers who already have any fixed obligation, I am not going to give any loans to them, right? So the cutoff over here is 0. So you have to have a fixed obligation of 0. So your score over here becomes 45. So this becomes 22 and this becomes 45. So you see that now this borrower is 121. Now the cutoff score has become 121, but the total application score of this borrower was 122. So it means that okay, this borrower is still now being accepted. Okay. Now borrowers previously it was what? Borrowers from 108 onwards was getting the loan. Now borrowers from 108 to 121 are all getting decline. So now you are only acquiring borrowers after 121, scores who have more than 121, and hence now you are at a better of position. So the acquisition that you are making during this time is a way better one. And say over here, I say that okay, borrowers who have made inquiries between 1 to 5, right, or was previously being given the loan. Now, even if the borrower had made a single inquiry and has been rejected by the bank, right, then I'll not be giving the loan. So over here, this score comes, I change this score to 35. The moment I change this score to 35, you see that this borrower gets declined. Because now given this stringent, so by kind of using this application scorecard, right, by using application scorecard and by changing the categories across the application scorecards, what you can always do is you can adjust your acquisition portfolios accordingly. Clear? Okay. So I just take a quick pause over here. So one quick question, Harish. Is my voice getting broken out in between? Because Mranmoy is facing this problem. So I wanted to understand whether you are also facing a similar issue. Okay. So, Mrinmoy, I think what you can do is you can just quickly drop off. I'll take a pause in between. So you can quickly drop off and join back. And then we'll get started. Okay, am I audible now? Rinma, you hear me? Harish, just give Rinma a couple of minutes. He's trying to join back. Okay. Okay. So this is more or less, an overview of using about application scorecards. Why is it used? How is it used? And what are the different areas of application? Okay. So now Harish has a very interesting question over here. I'll take that question up. Even though I had marked this question over here, Harish, I appreciate your question. So, so Harish is asking that how can we decide the minimum cutoff criteria for each risk determinant? So it is done appropriately through an analysis, Harish, that you have to understand. So while you are deciding the cutoff, right, you have to understand that there is always an opportunity cost, right? So if I'm like declining a borrower, I am foregoing it's foregoing an opportunity cost, right? So the minimum score criteria is to be decided by the strategy team and through an appropriate analysis. So that is not a part of risk modeling. So even I do not have very clear idea as to how they are doing it. So what they try to do is they try to get into some kind of a compromise between the risk and the opportunities that are there. So every time you hire a borrower, you are increasing your RWA, and every time you are ignoring a borrower, you are foregoing a certain part of profit and growth. So you have to always balance between the two and reach out to a cutoff. Now this cutoff is generally kept relatively low during good times, but during stress or during downturn times, this cutoff is generally increased in order to detoxify the portfolio with a greater stress on the systemic stability of the bank at that point of time, right? So if possible, if time permits, after all our model development exercises are completed, I will try to butt in this particular part, right? I'll try to butt in with this particular part and discuss how strategy teams do their things, right? Okay, fine. Okay, from here, let's move on to the next part. So now you guys have a clear idea. Do you guys now have a clear idea of the working of a application scorecard? Now I'll come back to the technical details when we move into the model development parts. Right, we'll be talking about it in more details. But before that, we'll talk about the next set of scorecards, which is your behavior scorecards. How is it that a behavior scorecard is taken? So now I have talked about acquisition. While I was talking about acquisition scorecards, right? I was talking about it in terms of personal loans, right? Now, also when we develop application scorecards, we will develop it with a personal loan, right? On the other hand, when I talk about the behavior scorecard and its role in risk management, I will be talking about this behavior scorecard in terms of its uh, so in terms of a credit card product, right? So even when we are developing a behavior scorecard, we will do it for for a credit card product as well. Okay, so over here, so we will be talking about the behavior scorecards, right? So now one thing we have seen for acquisition scorecards is that they are used for acquiring customer on their books of the bank. But now, let's say there is a borrower who has already been acquired on the books of the bank. Then what? Okay, so then what? So once a borrower has been acquired on the books of the bank, then after that, what do you do? So from here, what we have is a scorecard, which is a behavior scorecard. So that is where the role of a behavior scorecard comes in. And once the borrower has been given the loan, from the next stage onwards, we begin off by assessing the behavior risk of the borrower. Right. So this is the account management stage where you will be taking up your account management strategies, you'll be taking up your account management decisions. So the question that comes out over here is that why do I use a behavior scorecard? So I use the behavior scorecard to assess the behavior risk associated with the borrower, right? Now, after this, the next question comes out over here is that how does this help me in control the credit? Now, my objective is that I have given loan to 10 borrowers. Out of these 10 borrowers, how many of them are likely to go back and pay the credit, right? So this is where the assess the willingness of the borrowers to pay back the existing credit is concerned. So basically, over here, we want to assess the willingness of the borrowers to pay back the existing credits. And based on that, we want to decide on the quality and the quantity of the secondary line of the credit. Like the credit limit increases, the credit limit decreases, loan top ups, etc. Right? So over here, now the behavior scorecards are mostly used to take into account to work to deal with the account management strategies. right? So it would deal with the account management strategies. Now, when we are trying to, when we talk about, yeah, so when we are trying to talk about the, when we're trying to assess the willingness of the borrowers to pay back the existing credits. So, so just let me rephrase this part. I just lost out in between. So basically, I've given the loan to a borrower, and now I want to understand how many of them are actually going to pay back the loan to me. What I do is I continuously monitor the payment patterns of the borrower. What I try to understand is that how willing is he to pay back the loan. So it may be that he takes the loan and he runs off. He may be a Mr. Malia. He may be a Mr. Nirav Modi. So what we do is we need to constantly keep on monitoring the repayment strategies, the way he is actually repaying the loan. So is it that he is undergoing a deterioration in his repayment capability, right? So this is where this assessment comes in. So all we need to do is we need to assess the willingness of the borrowers to pay back the existent credits. And based on that, we want to decide on the quality and the quantity of the secondary line of credit. Now, this strategy can be used to decide on. So, if I see that okay, there's a very good borrower who is paying back his dues very nicely, then I know that yes, this borrower is a very good borrower. He's consistent in his paybacks and everything, and also let me offer him a secondary line of credit. So, this way, the behavior scorecard helps us efficiently channelize the secondary line of credit, right? So the question that comes out is that Tanma, you have been talking about the assessing the willingness to pay, and talking about the secondary line of credit and all, but the question that comes out is that how does it actually control the quality of the credit? So behavior scorecards assess the probability of the borrower of defaulting in the next 12 months. So what we try to do is we try to assess the probability of the borrower to default in the next 12 months. So higher the probability of a borrower to default, lower is the willingness of the borrower to pay. And lower the willingness to pay, higher would be the risk associated with the borrower, and hence lower would be the secondary line of credit associated with the borrower. So over here, all we want to understand is that what are the chances that this borrower would be defaulting in the next 12 months. Now, if I can identify the borrowers who have relatively higher chances of defaulting in the next 12 months based on their payment history, what I'll do is I'll say, okay, man, this guy has a high chances of default. Let's not give the credit back to him. So the question that comes out is how does it control the quantity? So this is the way it controls the quantity and the quality of the credit. So if you have again two borrowers to whom you can give a secondary line of credit, instead of giving, say you have $200 to give a loan to or an additional line of credit, so it need not necessarily be you give $100 to each. What you can do is you can actually look into their chances of defaulting, and the borrower who has the lower chances to default can be given the higher probability of the loans, right? So we can given a higher probability, and after that what we do is, so you check, okay, this is a borrower who has a higher probability to default. Say borrower A has 0.02% chances of default, whereas borrower B has 2% chances of default. So I'll not give the credit to borrower B. So I'll give him say $50. The remaining $150 I'll give it to borrower A. So I know that I'm giving credits to the safe hand. So I'm efficiently allocating the credit. So given the same exposure, I'm just reducing the riskiness associated with a given exposure. So this is where the quantity of the secondary line of credit dependent, and so this is how it controls the quantity of the quality of the credit, right? And other factors which talk about the existing performance of the borrower and credit utilization tendencies. So to assess the borrower's riskiness, I look into his utilization of the product, I look into his repayment consistency in the repayment capacity, and so on. So this is what a behavior scorecard is. The behavior scorecard helps us assess the behavior risk associated with the borrower. It helps us assess the willingness of the borrower to pay back the credit, and based on the willingness to pay back, this particular scorecard helps us assess the riskiness associated with a particular borrower. right? And hence it helps us in allotting efficiently the lines or the respective lines of credit. Clear? So any questions up to this part? Is this concept of behavior scorecards clear to us? Great. Fine. So so coming to the next parts, right? So the question that comes out is how is the relative ranking of the borrowers done in terms of riskiness? The relative ranking is done using the behavior scorecards. Fine. So now we'll be talking about credit card as a business product over here, right? So we'll be talking about credit cards and we'll be looking into the number of variables that are there. Okay. So we have a credit card product over here, right? So there is a borrower, Mr. A, who is an income salaried guy, right? And he wants to apply for a credit card with a limit of rupees 50,000, right? And what he wants to do is, so now what we want to understand is that so basically he has been given a credit card with uh, yeah, so he has been given a credit card with the limit 50,000. So what we have over here is an obligor state. So what we want to know is whether this borrower is a good borrower or a bad borrower, right? So now we have some variables which are indispensable and which are actually very important for these, which are actually very important for these models. So we'll try. So what we'll do is we'll start working it out from here itself. So basically now similarly, I have created another behavior scorecard over here. This is a representative behavior scorecard. But just to refresh one important things to you guys, that the variables that I have identified over here are very representative variables, and when we develop our own behavior scorecards using the SaaS platform, you will see that most of these variables that I've done are coming out significant. So these are very something which are very, uh, kind of uh, relevant variables and compulsory variables for behavior scorecards to occur. Right? So over here, what we have over here is the following. So the first part is we have the business. So the business problem is that there is a credit card product which was given to Mr. A, who is a salaried borrower, and the limit of his card is 50,000. Now, the at a behavior stage, we try to assess the willingness of the borrower to pay back. And some important variables over here are some of the variables that we have used over here are the risk determinant that we have used are month on books, percentage delinquents in the last 12 months, average payment balance ratio in the last 12 months, average utilization in the last 12 months. So I've just used these basic variables. Right now, there are the original or real-time scorecards will have more complicated variables. We'll come to those more complicated variables going forward. Right. So, but let's have a quick look over here. So let's see why am I using these variables for assessing the behavior risk associated with a credit card. Okay, so let's have a look into each of these variables. The first variable that I've used is the month on books. Now, month on books is nothing but the number of months for which this particular account has been on the books of the bank, right? So it comprises of, it's a difference between two variables. One is as on date and the date when the account was opened. So if I have a credit card account, right, I opened a credit card account on 1st Jan 2015, right? So today is 21st October 2018. So I opened it on Jan 28, 2015, and today is October 2018. So I have been on the books of the bank for the entire of 15, 16, 17. So that's 12 into 3, that's 36 months, and 10, this is 46 months on the books of the bank, right? So over here, what we have is month on books is seasoning of the. So basically, the month on books gives us an idea about how seasoned an account is, right? It is generally seen for retail products that it takes around 12 to 18 months for an account to get seasoned, right? So one, what happens when an account gets seasoned? When an account gets seasoned, the chances of the borrower becoming bad in the future greatly reduces. So if in a given snapshot month, if in a given point of time, out of 100 borrowers, I have 80, 90, 90 borrowers who are seasoned, and I have 10 borrowers who are unseasoned, right? Then you will see that the percentage of the borrowers turn out to be bad in the performance of 12 months from the season segment is much lower than in the non-season segment. So this is something which is really very important. So over here for the month on books, what we need to know is, so as on date, so date when the account was opened, it shows, so it basically shows the vintage of a customer on a particular account with the bank. So a borrower with a greater vintage is seen to have lower chances of default, right? Typically, in a retail portfolio, a credit on an account takes 12 months or less. So it takes anywhere between 12 to 18 months to get seasoned. right? So this is a month. So more seasoned an account is. So when an account is seasoned, right? So the greater the vintage of the account with the book of the one, the book of the bank is for that particular product is, lower would be the chances of the borrower to go bad, right? So when for developing behavior scorecards, whenever you are developing behavior scorecards, month on books is a very important behavioral variable, right? So over here, what we get to see is we have the seasoning of the accounts. Now, similarly, the next set of and as the vintage increases, right, we see that the score also increases. The next part that we have over here is the percentage delinquency in the last 12 months. So there is percentage delinquency in the last 12 months. So that is the behavior risk. Okay, so before I move on, Harish has a question. Are seasoned accounts more prone to prepayments? Uh, Now, that is something that we need to actually assess, right? So whether they are mostly doing a prepayment or whether they are doing whether they are paying back it within the time frame that are there, or whether they are paying back more or something. But all we can what we can say is that the chances to default goes down over a period of time. Now, whether they are making a prepayment or they are making a payment on the due date is not important, right? So the what matters to us from the perspective of risk is whether he is going delinquent and finally defaulting or not, right? So whether he makes a prepayment or he revolves around a certain amount of money by just paying back the minimum balance, or he pays or he pays it all on the due date. So that those are factors which would be important to the strategy guys, because they are the one who are concerned with the profitability analysis, right? So we do not generally do much of a profitability analysis. We are more into understanding the risk perspective. So whether he pays back the minimum amount due and revolves the remaining amount, or what he does is he pays back the minimum amount, or he pays back all the amount over a period of time and he doesn't revolve anything. So that's not our concern. Our concern is whether he goes delinquent for a substantial period of time and he defaults or not. If he is not going default, he is good for us, right? Now how he is maintaining his good status, that is not our concern from the risk perspective. Now whether they are more prone to prepayments or not, that can be assessed from the data set, or from the behavioral variables that are there within the data. Clear, Harish? Great. Am I skipping any part of the question, that answer to the question that you were looking for? Am I missing out any part? Okay. So if you feel that I am giving an answer which is not relevant to the question that you are asking, or that does not clarify your doubt 100%, just stop me there and just tell me to rephrase it. So like this, we have these four variables. Like the delinquency variable is one variable, the payment balance is one variable, utilization is one variable. So they give us, but if you look into these variables that are there, they are all behavioral in nature. They reflect some behavioral aspect associated with a given product. I mean, behavioral aspect of a borrower associated with a product, right? So these variables will actually help us capture the behavior risk associated with the borrower's lending, right? So what we'll do is let's take a pause here for the day, right? The next class we'll rephrase this, or we'll just go deep into this behavior scorecard the next day, right? We'll look into the use of behavior scorecards, and then we'll start talking in the next class. We'll start talking about the scorecard development exercise, right? So then, how is it? So what are the things that we do? The next is what are the analysis performed, and what are the key deliverables out of each of these stages, will be discussed in the subsequent discussion. So when I talk about a behavior scorecard, the next day we'll talk about seasoning analysis as well, right? So how is a seasoning analysis important and all? So we'll talk about it like that. We'll talk about it in the next class, right? So thank you guys. Thank you for your time, right? If you are unable to make it to my sessions on Saturdays and Sundays, just to give me a initial heads up so that I'll plan my weekends accordingly, right? Bye bye. Have a great week ahead, and let's catch up next week. And if you know anyone else who may be interested for the module, because there are just two of you, I can take up like 3, 4 more guys over here. Just do let me know. Bye bye. And I'll be uploading a couple of more recordings. Do stay in touch. Do follow those recordings as well. Bye bye.